What if you could predict the final results of your prints before ever even making an enlargement? Now this might sound too good to be true, but it's actually pretty simple. So how do you do this? Well, you make a contact sheet. Yep, that's it. You can stop watching this video now. But hold on, stick with me because the method I'm about to show you can seriously transform your printing process. I'm gonna show you my simple approach and standard setup for making really quick, perfect proof prints right off the bat. So here's the secret. You need to figure out a proper exposure and development for a standard negative and match that to your printing paper. So what you want to do is match your materials and equipment to create a standardized system. That way you'll know what a perfect exposure and development is for a negative printed on your standard system. Now there are many different ways you can do this, but I would say one of the simplest and maybe most straightforward ways is to use a contact sheet. And by this, I mean a proper contact sheet, because this is gonna tell you absolutely everything about your negatives. It's gonna let you know if they're underexposed, overexposed, underdeveloped, or maybe you hit the jackpot, underexposed and underdeveloped. But whatever it is, your contact sheet's gonna reveal this and then you can fix it. So before I jump ahead and assume that you have a proper exposure and develop of your negative, let's go through and quickly explain how to actually make a proper contact sheet. Well, what you want to do is something that's called a maximum black test. So this maximum black is the minimum exposure through your clear film, an unexposed piece of film that has been developed. It shows the minimal exposure to produce a full black in the paper. So there's an exposure time that's gonna give you a dark gray, a darker gray, then black, and then if you keep exposing, it doesn't get any darker. That is your maximum black exposure time. So to find this, you can make just a simple series of test strips, either using the rebate of your film or some clear, unexposed frames of your film. But these do have to be developed the same, because when you develop, it creates a fog or some density on the film. So you can make exposures from say 3 to 21 seconds. Now in my setup, I use my enlarger height to make a standard 8x10 proof print. I use a filter number 2 and my aperture at f11. So you're gonna look at that test strip, and then the first exposure that doesn't get any denser to your eye, when it just fades all to black, that exposure is gonna be your maximum black test time. Now I go one step further. After I find that time, I do 1 second increments around that. So if it was 9 seconds, I would do a 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. To really dial that in a little bit further. So then using that same exposure time or series of exposures, you're gonna wanna make your contact print. That's how you make a proper contact proof that's gonna show you what's going on with your negatives. Because once we have that, that's gonna show you how well your film exposure and development is matching with your filter, paper, and paper developer and the whole system you have. For example, if things look really low contrast in your contact sheet, that is gonna typically mean that you're not developing your film for that scene long enough. If the highlights are blown out on the contact sheet, that means for that scene, your development was too much. Underexposed, you're gonna see that your blacks and your shadows just go totally to black. So when you're judging your contact sheets, what you have to keep in mind is that the shadow detail and shadows are affected much more by exposure, and the highlights and levels of the highlights is affected much more by the development. Now both can play a small role, but that's a general kind of rule. So then if everything went well in that area and your contact sheet looks good, it's simply a matter of extrapolating that data to a working proof print. Now this is usually pretty straightforward. Like for my medium format camera and this setup with my Saunders, my contact sheet and my 8x10 proof time and filter are basically identical. Meaning once I have my contact sheet, if it looks good on the contact sheet, I can put the enlarger in the carrier and print an 8x10 at the exact same setting. Now a lot of this is gonna depend on the enlarger type, the light source, your materials, your lens, and different things like that. Like on my Bessler, there's a little discrepancy and I just have a slight compensation factor. but I can still judge just off of my proofs what a good print is going to give me in almost a perfect starting time right off the bat. So if you do find some deviation, it should be consistent, and then you'll still have a starting point. So if you look at this contact sheet here, this was made with a number 2 filter, which I always start with, at 9 seconds for the contact print. So then all I did to make this proof print, add an 8x10 of that negative, and this has got a black border, so it could be a little deceiving, was I stuck the negative carrier, and my standard 8x10 with a square negative is actually a 7x7 print. And I gave it 9 seconds with the number 2 filter, and they essentially are a perfect match. So this is my standard working proof system, and it's for that film developer, that paper developer, this enlarger with that filter. If anything changes, things will get skewed. So what you have to do is keep everything in that system consistent, and then you'll know where to start. This is exactly why I always stress the importance of having a standardized setup, one film, one developer, one paper, one developer. It just makes things much simpler. Because I get it, I have many different cameras, I do shoot with different films, I have a bunch of different papers, and it's taken me a really long time to create standards for all that stuff. And even now, I always run into variations where I'm starting over. And if you're in the camp of you just started doing darkroom printing, and you only have one film, one developer, one paper developer, one enlarger, like you're so far ahead of the curve in getting this set up correctly, because it just takes all the confusion out of it. You can really just start working on making perfect proofs and then build from there. Hey, and if you're enjoying this video, please do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button. And if you haven't subscribed, do that so you don't miss future darkroom videos. All right, next, what I would do is just start practice making proofs. Analyze your contact sheet and say, hey, this will make a good proof at my standard proof time. Or this one looks a little low and flat. I need to decrease the exposure a little and increase the contrast. It really becomes pretty intuitive to start making really educated guesses based off of this. And you'd be really surprised at how often you will just hit this like right on the head. One of the first assignments I give my students is to learn how to use these contact sheets to make a series of proof prints, like 5 or 6, up to 10 proof prints that you like on your contact sheet. And you could make 5x7s or 8x10s of them, and then pin them up so you can live with them for a little bit. Now, what this does is, well, for one, many times I've jumped into a negative, spent all this time and work and paper and effort, and then I didn't even really like the picture. So this can prevent that, and it also gives you a little bit of breathing room to figure out what you actually want to do and prepare a plan for those images. The other thing it does is a lot of times it's really hard to carve out 3, 4, 12 hours to get in the darkroom. With this system, you can literally jump in the darkroom for 15 minutes to a half hour and come out with 4 or 5 really nice looking proof prints and then build on that. It's a really great way to evaluate your work without committing a real ton of your time, paper, and all this commitment in the darkroom. Now, does this make test strip printers and analyzers and all these other tools obsolete? Absolutely not at all. In fact, if you've seen some of my negatives, you'll know that sometimes the highlights they're way off in another stratosphere somewhere. Like they're so dense, it's ridiculous. And that can be one of the hardest things to judge on a contact sheet. That's the first sign that I'm gonna grab my highlight test strip printer or use some kind of analyzer to bring the highlights down to a printable level and let me know where that exposure is. You can make an educated guess, but it gets trickier. But with experience, you can get this right a lot of the time too. So I would say if you implement these two strategies together, a good contact proofing and work proof print setup along with a good method for test strips and then other tools as well, you will really be on your way to mastering your materials and setup. So in some upcoming videos, I'm going to be going over some things to build on these standardized systems, like matching your filters, like highlight speed matching your filters and some other really cool stuff. So definitely look forward to those videos. But the real point of all this is to be able to look at your contact sheets and have a really good, valid starting point for your work prints. So you're not coming in here going, well, I guess I got to start from 2 seconds to 40 seconds every time, and who knows what contrast this thing is. Like, no, you're gonna be dialed in right from the get-go. And with experience, this just becomes easier and more accurate. I can usually get a really good starting work print right off my contact sheets, I'd say 80 to 90% of the time, and it saves me so much time and frustration. So if you enjoyed this video, I think you're gonna love the next one right here.